My name's Tom Eagan and I work with the Aspen Historical Society. At the Society I am the Director of Communications, which for someone like myself who likes to talk a lot, it's perfect. And the other half of what makes my fit with the Historical Society great is I love the history of Aspen and I love history in general, but living here, unless you've actually spent any time thinking about it or studying it, you might just think, oh, Aspen, great ski resort, let's move on. But you know, Aspen's history goes back 130 years. Aspen's history is a microcosm of the West. You've got the mining history, which started in 1879, and in that same year of 1879, there was also an uprising from the Ute Indians. So just kind of towards the end of the Indian Wars and the Indian situation, I won't call it a problem, which is what it was called back then, but towards the end of that, Aspen started. The silver boom really started in 1879, and through the 1880s and into 1893, Aspen was probably more well known throughout the world then than it is now. Reason that it was known then is silver was one of the minerals that backed the currency of the United States. So until 1893, you could mine silver and the government had to buy it, and the price was inflated artificially because everything that was mined basically had to be purchased by the government to back the money. In 1893, the government repealed that double standard of silver and gold and went just to the gold standard, and literally overnight the price of silver dropped, but more importantly the demand dropped. But Aspen didn't become a ghost town. And one of the reasons is the Hotel Jerome, where we're standing right now, was built in 1888, 1889, and it's a brick building. So once you reached a point that your mining camp was becoming a town, you were building brick buildings, and that was usually after the trains had gotten here. And the trains got to Aspen in 1887, 1888. So you had trains, you had really rich deposits of silver ore. Aspen produced 1/6 of the country's and 1/16 of the entire world's silver was right out of little old Aspen. And we had brick buildings, so you were saying to the world, we're going to make it, we're going to be a town. Even when the country went off that silver standard, a lot of the mines closed, but within a year, a number of them had reopened. There were still about 8,000 people living here. We didn't become a ghost town. And even at the turn of the century, 7 years after that silver bust, there were still 5,000 people in town here, which is about what we have nowadays as a permanent population. The people who had moved here in the 1880s and 90s became farmers and ranchers. They were from northern Italy, a lot of them, and they just liked the area. And I think anyone who lives here today can really connect with that really basic thought. They loved the area. Aspen's population probably got to 700, was its lowest point in the 1920s. And then in 1929, when the rest of the world was going into a depression, Aspen had already been there for about 20 years, so didn't affect us too much. And then as you got into the 1930s, skiing started to become perhaps the next savior of town. And the first paying customers came to Aspen in December of 1936. And they were the first paying skiing customers. And from then, it's obviously taken off. The first chairlift was built in 1946. And then in 1950, we had the FIS World Cup races here. In the winter of 50-51 was the first year of Winterskol. And Winterskol means toast to winter. In 1951, it was the 50-51 season, January 51, Jack DePachter and Delphine Carpenter just decided to have a carnival, because what had begun to become apparent was Christmas and New Year's were the busy days of the winter. In 1950-51, the early 50s, once Christmas ended, boy, you went through the month of January with very little going on. I mean, as you can hear by the traffic, you know, we're in January now. There's a lot more that goes on now in January than did back then. So they wanted to do two things with Winterskol. They wanted to create a party for the locals after you'd been through the busy winter or the busy Christmas, New Year season. It was a party for the locals, but we also wanted to have some other reason for visitors to come to Aspen. So Winterskol in the early 50s was a week-long adventure. I mean, they had 2 parades, there were ski races that involved world-class skiers, there were ski races for couples, there were costume ski races, there were dances, there were if you can think of any sort of event that would happen in a small town when TV wasn't big, this is where it was. There were game nights. Hey, if you want to see Aspen without the crowds, but you still want to have some fun, check it out during Winterskol. In fact, it was originally called the Aspen Winter Carnival and eventually became Winterskol. Just a fun time in the middle of winter to kind of recharge the batteries after a busy holiday season. And I think it's got a good future in that respect, because if nothing else, we've always had plenty of imagination when it comes to having a good time around here.